Sometime in the early morning, while the city still looked undecided about whether to wake or stay asleep, I opened my email and saw the message that was supposed to change my year. Subject line: Compensation Adjustment. My coffee chilled while I read the numbers. Bonus: 0. Not delayed. Not reduced. Eliminated. I leaned back in my chair inside the glass cube they called the Analytics Division at Lattice Forge Capital. The place specialized in investment strategy for mid-sized manufacturing firms. The clients were dull. The spreadsheets were not. My model had landed the company its largest client of the quarter. The engagement contract tied the firm to a multi-year advisory agreement worth several million in revenue. My manager, Arlen Pike, had congratulated me in front of half the office. He had even said the words people remember. "Your bonus will be very strong this cycle." That sentence was now apparently imaginary. I walked across the floor past rows of glowing monitors and stopped at the office with the smoked glass door. Arlen Pike sat behind his desk with a smile that looked rehearsed. I placed a printed copy of the bonus memo on his desk. "My compensation notice shows no bonus," I said. He barely glanced at the paper. "That is correct. You told me the client deal triggered performance incentive. It triggered revenue for the firm." I stayed standing. "The agreement states analysts receive a percentage of new advisory revenue tied to models that close contracts." He folded his hands as if preparing for a speech. "It was never your bonus," he said calmly. "It is my turn to make money." The sentence hung in the air like a bad smell. I let silence do the talking. Arlen leaned back. "You are young," he added. "You should view this as experience." Experience. That magical corporate currency that pays no rent. I returned to my desk with a calm expression that made my coworkers assume the meeting went well. Inside my head, I was not calm. Numbers do not lie. People do. My laptop still held every version of the model that won the contract. Metadata recorded authorship. Revision logs showed the timeline. But companies do not hand over bonuses because an employee waves spreadsheets around. Contracts decide money. I opened the employment agreement I had signed when Lattice Forge recruited me out of graduate school. Page 12 contained a section most people skip: Performance Incentive Structure. My name appeared there. The clause described a percentage allocation for revenue generated through proprietary analysis that directly led to signed client agreements. There was also a quiet sentence near the bottom: Disputes regarding compensation may be resolved through binding arbitration initiated by the employee. Most people never read that far. I did. Arlen had assumed something simple: that I was young enough to complain and then accept disappointment. That assumption amused me. Corporate offices often believe power sits in corner rooms. In reality, power lives inside documents. I opened the deal file tied to the manufacturing client contract. The engagement letter credited the analytical framework used to justify the advisory partnership. The framework had a name: Raven Model. That was my name for it. A late-night joke after too much cold coffee. Attached inside the file was a presentation Arlen had shown the clients. Slide 3 carried the title: Raven Market Exposure Model, authored by Lila Hart. I smiled slowly. Arlen Pike had taken my bonus. He had forgotten something basic about financial professionals. We keep records. By the time the office lights dimmed later that evening, I had gathered every document that told the story: emails praising the model, internal reports linking the client's signature to my analysis, the compensation clause in my employment contract. One file folder now contained the quiet beginning of a very expensive problem for my manager. I closed my laptop and stood. Across the office floor, Arlen Pike laughed with a senior director near the coffee station. He looked relaxed. He believed the situation was finished. I believed it was just getting interesting. Arbitration filings require a simple statement: claim for unpaid compensation. I wrote the opening sentence while the city outside turned from gray to gold. Arlen Pike wanted his turn to make money. I intended to demonstrate something else entirely. Documentation gets the final turn, and documentation had excellent memory. The arbitration filing took less than half an hour. The effect on the office took less than half a day. Around the middle of the morning, a message appeared in my inbox from corporate legal. Subject line: Arbitration notice received. The message politely confirmed that Lattice Forge Capital had been notified of a compensation dispute under the binding arbitration clause in my employment contract. My coffee tasted excellent that morning. Within an hour, Arlen Pike appeared beside my desk. His voice carried a forced, casual tone. "You filed a claim?" "I filed a request for arbitration." "Over a discretionary bonus?" I turned my screen slightly so he could read the highlighted section of the contract. The clause describing revenue-linked performance incentives. "Not discretionary," I said. "Contractual." Arlen studied the text longer than he expected to. His jaw tightened. "You should have come to me before escalating this." I did. His expression suggested that conversation had not gone as planned. The next few days turned into a quiet corporate storm. Human resources requested documents. Legal requested documents. Accounting requested documents. I sent everything. Version histories of the Raven model. Email threads connecting my analysis to the client engagement. Presentation slides used in the final pitch. The compensation clause. The key detail sat inside the engagement contract signed with the manufacturing client. A paragraph explained that the advisory strategy depended on proprietary market modeling developed internally by Lattice Forge. The attachment naming the model listed its author, Lila Hart. That detail mattered because the bonus formula triggered when analysis produced signed advisory revenue. Arlen Pike had apparently decided that formulas were flexible. Arbitration tends to disagree. Around the early afternoon on a gray weekday, the firm arranged a preparation meeting. I sat across a conference table from two corporate attorneys. One of them adjusted his glasses and spoke carefully. "Miss Hart, the firm believes the bonus pool distribution allows managerial discretion." "I read the clause," I said. "The discretion applies to allocation percentages among analysts. It does not eliminate payment tied to qualifying revenue." The attorney paused. That pause lasted just long enough to signal that someone else had noticed the same wording. Arlen Pike sat near the end of the table. He looked irritated. "This model was developed by the team," he said. I slid a printed version history across the table. Every revision carried timestamps. Every author tag carried my name. The attorney examined the pages. "So you are saying," he said slowly, "that the revenue triggering the incentive clause originated from work you independently produced." "Correct." Arlen exhaled sharply. "You are making this into a legal battle over one bonus." I tilted my head slightly. "No," I said. "You already made it legal." The room became very quiet. Arbitration hearings do not resemble courtroom drama. They resemble accountants arguing politely with documentation. That fact favors people who save their paperwork. During the following week, the arbitration panel requested final submissions. I prepared a summary statement that explained the timeline in precise language: development of Raven model, presentation to client, client signing advisory agreement, compensation clause triggered by revenue derived from proprietary analysis, bonus removed by management decision. The final page included the line Arlen Pike had delivered with such confidence: "It was never your bonus. It is my turn to make money." I included that quote because people remember arrogance more clearly than spreadsheets. Arbitrators are people. 2 days later, the hearing occurred inside a quiet office building downtown. A single arbitrator listened while both sides explained the situation. Arlen spoke confidently about leadership responsibility and team contribution. Then the arbitrator turned to me. "Miss Hart," she said, "how do you respond?" I placed the version history binder on the table. By showing the work. Numbers filled the next hour. Revenue projections, model outputs, Contract signatures. The arbitrator flipped through the pages slowly. At one point, she looked toward Arlen Pike. Did you personally create any portion of this model? He hesitated. The answer mattered. No. Silence returned again. I folded my hands and waited. Financial disputes reward patience, and patience was something I possessed in abundance, especially when someone else had already handed me the evidence. Arbitration hearings reward a calm voice, they punish careless statements. Arlen Pike had delivered several of those already. The arbitrator spent most of the session examining documents. Every page told the same story. A financial model called Raven predicted market exposure risk for mid-sized manufacturers. The analysis identified supply chain vulnerabilities that traditional advisory strategies ignored. One company had found that insight valuable enough to sign a long-term advisory agreement with Lattice Forge Capital. Revenue projections from that contract appeared clearly in the accounting records. The bonus clause in my employment agreement tied incentive compensation to new advisory revenue directly connected to proprietary analysis. Arlen Pike had removed the incentive allocation after the contract closed. The arbitrator adjusted a small stack of papers and spoke. Mr. Pike, your explanation suggests managerial authority allowed you to reassign the bonus. Correct. And the reason for reassignment? He leaned forward slightly. Leadership contributions. The arbitrator nodded slowly. Then she held up a printed email. The message came from Arlen Pike to the senior leadership group at Lattice Forge. Subject line: Client Acquisition Summary. Inside the message, he praised the Raven model and credited its development. The author line beneath the description displayed my name. The arbitrator read that line aloud. Then she looked at him again. Your own communication attributes the analysis to Miss Hart. Yes, he said, and the employment contract states analysts receive incentive compensation for revenue generated by their proprietary analysis. Another pause. Yes. She placed the email down. Then why was the incentive removed? Arlen shifted in his chair. It was never her bonus. It is my turn to make money. The room became quiet in a different way this time. The sentence sounded less impressive under fluorescent lighting and legal review. The arbitrator did not react immediately. She wrote a short note on a legal pad. Then she asked a question that corporate managers rarely enjoy. Are you aware that compensation tied to contractual formulas cannot be reassigned without consent from the employee? Arlen blinked. I believed it was discretionary. The arbitrator lifted the employment agreement. The language does not support that belief. Corporate lawyers dislike moments when documents speak louder than strategy. The firm attorney attempted to soften the damage. The company acknowledges the model contribution, he said carefully. The issue concerns interpretation of the incentive structure. The arbitrator closed the binder. I do not see ambiguity. My role in the hearing remained simple. I answered questions. I described how the Raven model generated its predictions. I explained how the client decision relied on those projections. Most importantly, I showed the financial output that convinced the manufacturer to sign a multi-year advisory agreement. Revenue from that contract would exceed several million over its lifetime. The incentive formula allocated a percentage of that revenue as analyst bonus. Even the smallest percentage produced a six-figure payment. That was the money Arlen Pike had decided belonged to him. When the questioning ended, the arbitrator announced that the written decision would follow after review. The hearing concluded. Outside the building, the afternoon air carried the quiet energy of a city that believed it understood business. Arlen walked past me toward the street. He looked annoyed rather than worried. You are making enemies, he said. I adjusted the strap on my bag. I am enforcing a contract. You could have accepted the situation and moved on. Why would I? He stared at me as if the answer should be obvious. I offered one. Financial agreements exist for a reason. He shook his head and walked away. The interesting part about arbitration is not the hearing. The interesting part is the decision. 3 days later, sometime during the early morning while the office coffee machine hummed quietly, an email arrived from the arbitration panel. Subject line: Final Award Determination. I opened the document. The first paragraph contained the words, "Every financial professional appreciates. Claimant prevails." The decision explained that the incentive clause applied exactly as written. The Raven model generated the advisory revenue. Therefore, the incentive payment belonged to its author. Arlen Pike had attempted to redirect compensation without contractual authority. The award required immediate payment of the bonus plus additional interest. There was also a small note regarding legal fees. Arbitration tends to appreciate clarity, and my documentation had been extremely clear. The decision circulated through Lattice Forge Capital faster than any office memo in recent memory. Around the middle of the morning, accounting contacted me with confirmation that the arbitration award had been processed. The bonus appeared in my compensation ledger. Interest included. Legal fees included. I allowed myself one quiet moment of satisfaction. Then I returned to work. Financial victories feel best when accompanied by professional calm. Arlen Pike did not share that philosophy. He appeared beside my desk before the afternoon coffee break. His expression suggested the decision had damaged his week. "You embarrassed the department," he said. "I enforced a contract. You turned a management decision into a legal event." "It already was a legal event." He leaned closer. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," I said evenly. "It makes documentation powerful." He opened his mouth as if to continue arguing. Then he stopped. Several coworkers nearby had begun paying attention. Office drama spreads quickly when bonuses are involved. Arlen straightened his tie and walked away. By the next day, rumors moved through the building like wind through dry leaves. Some employees believed the dispute proved young analysts could challenge senior managers. Others believed it proved Arlen Pike had made an expensive mistake. The most accurate interpretation sat somewhere in the middle. Contracts govern money. People who ignore them create problems. Later that week, the head of operations asked me to join a short meeting. The conversation occurred inside a small conference room overlooking the city skyline. Two executives sat across from me. One of them folded his hands and spoke directly. The arbitration outcome raised concerns about internal oversight. I waited. He continued. "The firm appreciates the revenue generated by your model." "Thank you." "We also believe management procedures must improve." I nodded slightly. Financial firms rarely enjoy public disputes involving compensation clauses. The executive glanced at a printed report on the table. "The Raven model continues producing valuable insights," he said. "Several clients requested similar analysis." "That is good news." "It is also why we would like you to lead the development group expanding that framework." Interesting. A promotion delivered quietly inside a corporate correction. "What would the role involve?" I asked. "Direct oversight of analytical strategy tied to client acquisitions." Another executive added a detail. "And revised incentive participation reflecting model ownership." I almost laughed. The irony was elegant. Arlen Pike had attempted to take one bonus. The result produced an entire revenue division attached to my work. Corporate gravity tends to pull toward whoever generates profit. Before leaving the room, I asked one question. "What happens to the previous management structure?" The executives exchanged a brief glance. "That matter is under review." Later in the afternoon, I noticed Arlen Pike packing files into a leather briefcase. His office door stood open. When he saw me passing the hallway, he spoke with a tired voice. "You enjoyed this?" I paused. "No," I said. "I respected the agreement." He looked toward the floor. "I underestimated you." "Many people underestimate contracts." That comment ended the conversation. I walked back across the floor of glowing monitors and sat at my desk. The Raven model spreadsheet filled the screen again. Numbers moved calmly through columns of risk analysis. Clients would continue signing advisory agreements. Revenue would continue appearing in financial reports, and incentive payments would continue following the formula written inside my employment contract. Corporate revenge rarely requires shouting. Sometimes it only requires patience, evidence, and a clause, hidden halfway down page 12. Around the early morning a week later, I arrived at the office while the building still smelled like fresh coffee and printer toner. My inbox held a short message from accounting. Subject line: Incentive Allocation Confirmation. The Raven model had generated another advisory engagement, a smaller contract this time, but the formula worked the same way. Revenue appeared. The incentive percentage calculated automatically. Numbers flowed exactly where the contract directed them. No interpretation required. I appreciated systems that respected mathematics. Across the office floor, a quiet shift in atmosphere had taken place. People greeted me with a little more curiosity than before. Word travels quickly when a junior analyst wins a legal dispute with management. Financial firms operate on reputation almost as much as performance. The arbitration decision had created both. Later that morning, the head of operations announced an internal restructuring. The analytical division would expand under a new strategy group responsible for proprietary modeling tied to client acquisition. Leadership of that group would fall to me. The announcement described the change as a logical step based on measurable results. Corporate language always enjoys understatement. After the meeting, several coworkers approached my desk. One of them lowered her voice slightly. "How did you manage to challenge management like that?" I answered honestly. "I read the contract." That advice surprised her. People assume complicated strategies produce financial victories. Often, the real advantage comes from understanding agreements that others ignore. By the following week, the Raven model team occupied a larger section of the floor. New analysts joined the group. Each one signed employment agreements containing incentive clauses very similar to mine. During orientation, I gave them one piece of practical guidance. "Keep records," I said, "and read every line before you sign anything." They laughed politely, assuming the advice belonged to corporate training culture. I understood it differently. Contracts decide where money travels. Documentation decides who controls the contract. One quiet afternoon, I walked past the empty office that once belonged to Arlen Pike. His nameplate had already been removed. Corporate life moves quickly once revenue shifts direction. Inside my own office, the Raven model continued producing projections across multiple industries: manufacturing, logistics, energy suppliers. Every new client agreement triggered the same incentive mechanism that had started the entire conflict. The difference now was simple. Nobody attempted to claim it belonged elsewhere. Late in the day, I opened the arbitration decision again. One paragraph stood out. Compensation earned through documented contribution remains the property of the employee under contractual agreement. Clear, precise, final. I closed the document and looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere inside another office building, another manager was probably telling an employee that a promised bonus had disappeared. That situation happens more often than companies admit. Many employees accept it, not because they lack evidence, because they never read the agreement that protects them. Arlen Pike believed something very simple when he took that bonus. He believed a young analyst would accept disappointment rather than challenge authority. Instead, he learned a quieter lesson. Financial professionals do not argue with feelings, they argue with documentation. And documentation tends to win, especially when someone says something unforgettable during a meeting. "It was never your bonus. It is my turn to make money." In the end, he was correct about one part of that sentence. It was my turn to make money. The contract had simply been waiting for someone to enforce it.